Layla, the stunning trophy wife of the powerful Sheikh Omar, thought she had everything: wealth, status, and the world at her feet. But behind the glittering facade, a secret affair with the charming Karim had set her on a dangerous path, one that would unravel everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the true cost of power. As the walls of her perfect life began to close in, Layla was about to learn that betrayal comes at a price, and in her case, that price might be everything. Layla Al-Mansour's life had always been one of ambition. Growing up in the heart of Cairo, she was far from the picture of wealth that the world would come to associate her with. Her family lived modestly, and although they weren't destitute, luxury was something they could only dream of. Layla, however, dreamed big. From a young age, she had an innate understanding of her beauty and the power it could yield. She knew how to charm, how to captivate, and how to make others see her as something more than just another face in the crowd. By the time she was in her early 20s, Layla's stunning looks had become her greatest asset. She worked as a model, landing campaigns for some of the most prestigious fashion houses. But as her career blossomed, so did her desire for something greater. She knew that she had the potential to marry into wealth and power, and she wasn't content with simply being a fleeting face in the fashion world. Layla was determined to claim the kind of life that most people could only fantasize about. It was at one of these high society events, a lavish gala in a hotel ballroom, that she met Sheikh Omar Al-Fad, a man in his late 40s. Omar was the embodiment of power and wealth. His deep-set eyes held a certain coldness, but there was something magnetic about him. He wasn't just rich. He was untouchable. He owned vast oil fields, had connections to political leaders across the Middle East, and was known for his quiet, calculating nature. When Layla's path crossed with his, she had no idea that this chance encounter would change the trajectory of her life. Their conversation was brief, but Omar was taken with Layla's beauty and poise. He admired how she carried herself, how effortlessly she navigated the world of wealth and privilege. Layla, in turn, was drawn to the Sheikh's commanding presence. His wealth was unquestionable, but it was his influence that intrigued her. She could see that he wasn't just a businessman. He was a man who moved through the world as if it belonged to him. To her, he represented the ultimate prize. It wasn't long before Omar began courting her in earnest. He showered her with extravagant gifts, jewelry, designer clothes, and even a private jet for travel. But more than these material possessions, Omar offered Layla something she couldn't ignore: a life of unimaginable luxury, and the kind of power that would put her on a pedestal above everyone else. She had never experienced anything like it. His wealth and influence seemed endless, and with him she felt invincible. For someone like Layla, who had always dreamed of escaping her humble beginnings, Omar was the answer to her prayers. Their relationship moved quickly. Within a year of meeting, Layla found herself walking down the aisle of a grand mosque in Dubai, her wedding dress shimmering under the soft glow of chandeliers. The marriage was the epitome of opulence, an event covered by the media, with the world's elite in attendance. For Layla, it was the culmination of all her aspirations. She had married a man who could give her everything she had ever wanted and more. Omar, for his part, was smitten with his new bride. He adored her beauty, but more than that, he enjoyed the attention that came with her. Layla was a trophy, a symbol of his success. Their union was a perfect match in the eyes of the world, a powerful man paired with an equally stunning woman. To the public, they were the epitome of glamour and sophistication, and their life together seemed like a fairy tale. But the truth beneath the surface was far more complicated. The Sheikh's wealth came with a price, an obsessive need for control. At first, Layla dismissed his possessiveness as a sign of love. He insisted on being with her at all times, monitoring her every move. She found herself secluded in his vast estates, surrounded by luxury but cut off from the world she once knew. She had everything, but she also had nothing. No friends outside of his circle, no sense of independence, and no freedom. Layla soon realized that her life, though gilded, was a carefully constructed prison. Omar's control over her grew stronger, and as the months passed, she began to feel trapped. Despite the grandiosity of her new life, she found herself longing for something more, something that would give her a sense of individuality again. Little did she know, this longing would lead her down a path that would change everything. Layla's life within the confines of her marriage to Sheikh Omar was both luxurious and stifling. At first, the grandeur of it all had been intoxicating. She reveled in the endless shopping sprees, the private yacht trips along the Mediterranean, the extravagant parties where the world's most influential people vied for her attention. But slowly, the initial excitement began to wear off, and with it came the realization that her life was controlled by forces far beyond her comprehension. The Sheikh was a man who thrived on power, and power, in his mind, extended beyond the boardroom and the business deals. It governed his personal life, too. The moment they were married, Layla understood that her role was no longer that of an independent woman. She was now an accessory, a status symbol, a trophy to be displayed. Omar's deep-seated need to control every aspect of her existence started to show its darker side. She found herself isolated in his palatial mansion in the hills outside of Dubai, a massive, sprawling estate surrounded by high walls and guarded gates. The servants were numerous, but there was no one there she could truly call a friend. The luxury she had once craved now felt suffocating, and the world she once knew, filled with work, freedom, and acquaintances, seemed like a distant memory. Omar had orchestrated her life to such an extent that even her social circle had been meticulously curated. He approved of who she could speak to, who she could meet, and who was allowed in her presence. At first, Layla tried to keep a sense of normalcy. She attended charity events, lunches with other wives of high-profile businessmen, and social gatherings where she had to be perfect in every way. Her beauty was always her greatest asset, but it became more of a commodity than anything else. The men around her, including her husband's closest associates, often admired her from a distance, but none of them dared approach her. They were all intimidated by her beauty, yes, but also by the immense power that Omar wielded. What started as a slight discomfort began to grow into a gnawing sense of dissatisfaction. The attention she once craved now felt like a cage, and her outward perfection began to mask the loneliness inside. Omar never seemed to notice, or if he did, he didn't care. He was too preoccupied with his empire, which took up most of his time. Layla's existence, in his eyes, was simply an extension of his wealth, a reminder to the world of his success. She had become nothing more than an ornament on his arm, someone to be admired, but not truly known. In the midst of this growing isolation, Layla began to sense a dangerous restlessness inside herself. Her desires, once repressed, started to surge to the surface. She longed for something more than just the life of a beautiful, silent wife. Her need for connection, for something that felt real, became impossible to ignore. It wasn't that she didn't love Omar, at least not in the way he expected her to. She had always admired his power and his ability to command respect, but she now realized that her admiration had turned to resentment. She was no longer a partner, she was a possession. That's when she met Karim. Karim was nothing like Omar. He wasn't part of the elite circle, nor did he have the wealth or power that Omar commanded. He was an entrepreneur from Beirut, a self-made businessman with a raw energy about him. He had none of the refinement of the wealthy elite Layla was used to, but that was precisely what drew her to him. He wasn't intimidated by her beauty or her wealth. Karim saw Layla as a person, not a commodity. He wasn't interested in what she could provide for him. He was interested in who she was beneath the surface. He listened when she spoke, made her laugh in a way that felt completely natural, and most importantly, he made her feel alive in a way Omar never had. Their meetings were secret at first, careful whispers over coffee at private locations away from prying eyes. Layla was drawn to the passion and freedom that Karim exuded. He wasn't interested in her as a trophy. He wanted to know the woman beneath the facade. It was a dangerous game, one that Layla knew she shouldn't be playing. But the more she saw Karim, the more she was captivated by his energy, his daring outlook on life, and the freedom he represented. With him, she wasn't just a beautiful wife. She was a woman with desires, dreams, and ambitions of her own. For the first time since her marriage, Layla felt the stirrings of something real, something that didn't come with strings attached. She began to fantasize about a life without Omar, a life where she could be free to make her own choices. But the more she got pulled into Karim's world, the more she realized how dangerous her desires had become. She was caught between the powerful, controlling influence of Omar, who had given her everything material she could ever want, and the raw, unpredictable thrill that Karim brought into her life. It was a dangerous balance, and she knew it was only a matter of time before something would break. Layla's affair with Karim had become a secret she could no longer manage alone. The emotions it stirred in her were far beyond what she had expected. Initially, their meetings had been filled with excitement and adrenaline, but as time went on, the guilt began to creep in. She felt as though she were leading a double life, one in which she was the perfect wife to Sheikh Omar, and another in which she was the passionate lover to Karim. Each meeting, each stolen moment with him, felt like a rebellion against the life Omar had built for her. The secret world they shared was intoxicating, but the weight of the deception was suffocating. Layla's feelings for Karim had grown deeper than she cared to admit. What had started as a fleeting escape from the suffocating luxury of her marriage had evolved into something more profound. Karim's genuine interest in her, his desire to know the person behind the designer clothes and the polished exterior, was something she had never experienced with Omar. She found herself longing for the kind of love that wasn't defined by wealth, power, or possession, but by mutual understanding and connection. With Karim, she felt free to be herself, a stark contrast to the woman she had become in her marriage. But as her feelings for Karim deepened, so did the dangers of their situation. Layla knew that Sheikh Omar was not a man who could be easily deceived. She had seen his controlling nature firsthand and understood the lengths he would go to protect his reputation. He had built an empire from the ground up, and he wasn't about to let a betrayal tarnish his carefully constructed image. Despite the bliss she felt with Karim, a knot of fear tightened in Layla's stomach each time she thought of Omar discovering the affair. She had seen the Sheikh's anger before, in small bursts when things didn't go his way, and she knew that if he ever found out about Karim, the consequences would be devastating, not just for her, but for everyone involved. The Sheikh's presence, once a comforting weight, had started to feel more like a shadow that loomed over her every decision. His possessiveness grew with every passing day, and Layla began to feel trapped once again. Only this time it wasn't just the walls of their mansion closing in on her. It was the walls of her own conscience, crumbling under the weight of the lies she had been telling. One evening, after a particularly passionate encounter with Karim, Layla sat alone in her bedroom, gazing out at the Dubai skyline. The city's lights twinkled below, a constant reminder of the life she had built, the life that had once seemed like a dream, but now felt more like a prison. She wondered what would happen if she left. Could she live without the wealth, the luxury, and the status? Could she really walk away from Omar and the life he had given her? The thought terrified her. She had become accustomed to this world, and despite the chains it placed on her, it was all she knew. The prospect of leaving everything behind for a life with Karim felt like an impossible choice. But even as the doubt lingered in her mind, she could feel the pull of Karim's love. He had told her he was willing to fight for her, to help her escape. He promised her a life where she could be free, where she wouldn't be confined by the expectations of a powerful husband or the suffocating demands of a privileged life. His words echoed in her mind, urging her to take a chance. She didn't know if she could, but the mere thought of it made her heart race. The tipping point came when Sheikh Omar returned early from a business trip. Layla had been in the midst of planning another secret meeting with Karim, the anticipation of it filling her with both excitement and dread. When Omar arrived unexpectedly, she had to scramble to hide her tracks. She couldn't let him know. She couldn't risk it. But as she looked into her husband's eyes, she saw something different. He wasn't the charming, attentive man who had courted her years ago. Instead, there was an unsettling coldness in his gaze. He was watching her with a quiet intensity that sent a chill down her spine. Layla's heart pounded as she greeted him, trying to maintain a calm facade. But as the evening wore on, it became clear that Omar knew something was wrong. The tension in the air was palpable. He asked pointed questions about her day, where she had been, who she had seen. Layla felt herself faltering under the weight of his scrutiny, but she managed to maintain the lie, at least for the moment. However, deep down, she knew the game was changing. Omar had started to watch her more closely. She could feel the net tightening, and she couldn't shake the feeling that her secrets were no longer safe. That night, as Layla lay awake in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the dangerous game she was playing. The Sheikh's suspicion was growing, and the affair with Karim was no longer something she could easily conceal. She knew she couldn't keep up the charade forever. Something was bound to give, and when it did, the consequences would be far worse than anything she could have imagined. Layla had become a woman torn between two worlds, one of power, luxury, and control, and another of passion, freedom, and the promise of love. But it was only a matter of time before the facade she had built would collapse, and when it did, there would be no going back. The tension in Layla's life reached a breaking point after the confrontation with Sheikh Omar. She had never seen him so cold, so calculating, and his eyes, those piercing eyes, had been fixed on her with an intensity that was both terrifying and familiar. She knew he could sense something was wrong. The evening they spent together after his return was a strange dance of silence and suspicion. He didn't accuse her directly, but his questions were loaded with a sense of unease, and she felt the walls of her carefully constructed world begin to crumble. Layla's mind raced. She knew that the Sheikh, for all his wealth and power, was also a master of control. He wasn't just an authoritarian businessman. He was a man who understood the subtleties of the human mind, able to twist people's thoughts and manipulate emotions to get what he wanted. If he suspected anything, she could not afford to let him uncover the truth. Not only would it mean the end of her marriage, but it would ruin her life in ways she couldn't even imagine. For the next few days, Layla attempted to maintain the facade of the perfect wife. She smiled, laughed, and went through the motions of their daily routines. But beneath it all, she was terrified. She couldn't shake the feeling that the Sheikh was biding his time, waiting for the right moment to confront her. And when he did, there would be no going back. He would not let this go. She could feel his eyes following her every movement, his sense of control tightening with each passing day. But as much as she tried to keep her world together, she couldn't ignore the deep, gnawing pull towards Karim. She longed to be with him, to escape the suffocating grip of Omar and his oppressive hold on her life. Karim had become her refuge, the one person who made her feel alive again. The passion they shared was something she hadn't felt in years. He made her feel seen, understood, and free. But she also knew that her relationship with Karim was a ticking time bomb. and it was only a matter of time before it would explode. It was during one of their secret meetings that the unthinkable happened. The night had started like any other. Layla sneaking away from the watchful eye of Omar, slipping out of the house under the cover of darkness to meet Karim in a secluded part of the city. The air was thick with anticipation, the excitement of their stolen moments palpable between them. But this time, things were different. There was an unease in the air, a sense of danger that neither of them could shake. Karim had been unusually quiet, his usual confidence replaced with a tension Layla couldn't ignore. As they sat in a dimly lit cafe, Karim's eyes kept darting to the door as though he was expecting someone. Layla tried to push away her growing unease, but it was impossible. The atmosphere had shifted, and her instinct told her something was terribly wrong. Karim leaned in, his voice low and urgent. "I think someone's onto us," he whispered, his brow furrowed. "I don't know how, but I feel like we're being watched." Layla's heart skipped a beat. The reality of their situation crashed over her. She had been careless, and the consequences of her actions were closing in. She couldn't bear the thought of losing Karim, but at the same time, she knew that if Omar discovered the affair, it would be the end of everything. The next few days were filled with a sense of dread that Layla couldn't shake. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, questioning every noise, every glance. She was convinced that someone knew about her affair, that her world was unraveling faster than she could control. She had become paranoid, unable to trust anyone, not even Karim. The fear of what would happen if Omar found out was consuming her, and she knew that the Sheikh would not hesitate to destroy everything in his path if he uncovered the truth. Then, just as Layla had feared, the moment of reckoning came. It wasn't an explosion of anger or a dramatic confrontation. Instead, it was quiet, methodical, a carefully orchestrated reveal that would change everything. The Sheikh had known all along. His patience had paid off, and he had been watching her every move. Layla had thought she was being discreet, but Omar was a man who could afford to wait. He didn't need to confront her immediately. He simply needed to gather his evidence, to ensure that when the time came, his retribution would be absolute. It was late one evening when the truth finally came crashing down. Layla had returned home, her nerves frayed, only to find the Sheikh waiting for her in their grand living room. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across the room, and the air felt thick with tension. She knew in that moment that the game was over. There was no turning back now. Omar didn't shout, didn't accuse her directly. Instead, he simply handed her a stack of photographs. Each one was a vivid reminder of her betrayal, images of her and Karim, captured in moments of intimacy. The reality hit Layla like a physical blow. She had thought she could keep this hidden, but the Sheikh had already known. He had already won. The silence in the room was deafening as Omar watched her, his face expressionless. Layla's mind raced, but there was no escaping the cold finality of the situation. The Sheikh had orchestrated this moment perfectly. He had caught her in the act of betrayal, and now he would make sure that her punishment would be just as meticulous. Layla's world, once so full of promise and luxury, had collapsed in an instant. Her choices had led her here, and now there would be no way out. No way to undo what had been done. The game was over, and the Sheikh would exact his revenge in ways that Layla could not yet comprehend. The fear of what was to come filled every inch of her being, but there was nothing left to do but wait for Omar's next move. The days after Omar confronted Layla were filled with a chilling silence. The Sheikh was a man who didn't speak out of turn, and now that he had her where he wanted her, there was no rush for him to make a move. Layla was trapped in her own mind, consumed with guilt, regret, and fear of the consequences. She had no idea what Omar intended to do, but the certainty in his eyes told her that it would not be something easy to overcome. He had caught her in the most vulnerable moment of her life, and the weight of that knowledge pressed down on her like a suffocating force. At first there were no overt signs of retribution. Omar continued with his daily routines, his business dealings, and social obligations, as if nothing had happened. But Layla could feel the change in him. There was a coldness to his presence, a kind of emotional distance that hadn't been there before. He no longer showered her with affection, no longer whispered sweet words in her ear. Instead, he treated her with a calculated indifference. It was as if he had already mentally cast her aside, but he wasn't done with her yet. His silence was more menacing than any anger he could have directed toward her. Layla had no idea how to break the tension, how to fix the mess she had created. She was torn between the haunting memory of the life she had built with Omar and the raw, unfiltered reality of her affair with Karim. Both worlds felt like distant dreams, unreachable and disintegrating right before her eyes. Karim had disappeared after the confrontation. His phone calls stopped, and his messages were unanswered. Layla felt a deep emptiness in her chest, as if she had lost the only thing that had brought her any joy in a long time. But she knew, too, that her association with Karim was dangerous. No matter how much she had wanted to escape, she had placed both herself and him in a perilous position. The days dragged on, and each moment with Omar felt like an eternity. Then, just when Layla thought things couldn't possibly get worse, the Sheikh's true intentions started to reveal themselves. He made no public spectacle, no dramatic show of anger. Instead, he began to isolate her even further from the world. The walls of their mansion seemed to close in tighter. He restricted her access to the things she had once enjoyed. Private meetings with her friends, solo trips, even her access to her own personal accounts was controlled. Every move she made was scrutinized. Every glance she received was calculated. She had become little more than a puppet in his game, but the strangest part was the quiet manipulation he employed. Omar was a man who understood leverage better than anyone. While he held her tightly within his grasp, he never spoke of divorce, never threatened to take away her wealth. Instead, he did something far more insidious. He began to slowly erase her autonomy. Every decision, no matter how small, was now subject to his approval. He made her question her own thoughts, her own desires, until she no longer felt like herself. She was a shadow of the woman she had been before she met him. The luxury that had once dazzled her now seemed hollow and meaningless in the face of his control. Layla realized that Omar wasn't just punishing her for the affair, he was taking away her sense of identity. She had no agency anymore. Even her emotions were being manipulated. If she cried, if she showed anger, it was seen as weakness. If she appeared indifferent, she was accused of coldness and distance. There was no way to win, no way to regain her sense of self. The world she had entered, once a paradise of wealth and power, had become her prison. But there was something more insidious happening in the background, something that took Layla a while to fully understand. As much as Omar isolated her, he also worked meticulously behind the scenes to discredit her to everyone she had once known. His power extended beyond the confines of their home. He had built a network of influence that touched every aspect of society, and now, he was using that network to quietly dismantle Layla's connections with the outside world. Friends she had once trusted began to pull away, whispers of her indiscretions spreading like wildfire, even though the truth remained hidden in the shadows. It wasn't long before Layla realized that she had lost everything: her relationship with Karim, her autonomy, her social standing. She was an island unto herself, and all the riches in the world couldn't save her from the emptiness she now felt. But Omar wasn't done with her yet. He still had the ultimate power over her, the power to ruin her completely. to destroy the remnants of her life in a way that she could never recover from. The final blow came when she received a letter from one of Omar's associates, someone she had once considered a friend. The letter contained a simple, devastating message. Omar had arranged for her to undergo a re-education. He had decided that the only way to fix her transgressions was to strip away her old identity entirely. Layla was going to be sent to a private, secluded estate where she would undergo intense psychological conditioning. Omar had carefully planned her downfall, and now he would mold her into the perfect wife once more, one who would no longer defy his will. Layla's heart sank as she read the words. There was no escape. The man she had once loved had become her tormentor, and the gilded cage she had entered so willingly had become a prison from which she could never break free. She was about to enter a world of psychological manipulation and isolation, a world where she would have no voice, no choice, and no freedom. She would be remade in the image that Omar desired, and there would be no one to stop it. In that moment, the woman who had once dreamed of a life beyond the ordinary, a life of luxury and power, realized that the price for those dreams had been far higher than she had ever imagined.